Our sermon reading today, Philippians 2, 5-8. We're going to be sticking in this verse really for a few weeks here and focusing on a number of different areas in this verse. But here's what Paul writes for us. In all your relationships, he says, have the same mindset, the same attitude as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something that to be used with for his own advantage, but rather he made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, even becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So I started, kind of gave this new series a title, and the title is just have the same attitude as Jesus, what Paul gave to us. So I call it the attitude check. Let's see where we are on this thing. And today we're going to talk about humility in the midst of attitude check. And it starts out, I'm going to start out with a story of a man you may know, Booker T. Washington. Hopefully most of you know who Booker T. Washington is. Booker T. Washington was born in 1856. He died in 1915. He was a great educator. He was a reformer. He was an author. He was actually an advisor to presidents, which a lot of people don't even know. He was just an amazing person, but he was a major influence on race relations. Okay? A major influence on race relations long before Martin Luther King Jr. was around. And he started that whole process. Now, he has some amazing quotes and did amazing things within his life. But one of the things that struck me is a story that I've read of him. And he shows us what true humility is about. Now, he started a thing called Tuskegee Institute then. Now it's Tuskegee University in Alabama. And he was a professor, okay? He's a great person. And one day he was walking down the street with deep-seated prejudice down in the South, in the late 1800s. And a woman who lived in this really big mansion called out to him, just saw him as just another black person, and said, "Hey, boy, come and chop some wood for me." Can you imagine that? And without missing a beat, the story is he took his jacket off, went there, not only chopped the wood for her, but carried it into the house for her. And he just left. He hardly got out of the house, and some of the help in the house said, "Do you know who that was? Ma'am, that was Professor Washington." And she was like, oh, then she felt bad finally. Yeah, right. And she said, "Oh, no." So she immediately goes to the Institute to apologize. She apologizes to him, and you know what he says to her? "Ma'am, you don't have to apologize to me. I'm happy to do favors for my friends." Can you imagine that woman became one of the warmest? She became one of the people who gave the most to his institute and his university, because humility draws people in. But I hear that story, and immediately in my mind, I think, how do you do that? How? He has some amazing quotes. One of his quotes that I really love says, "If you want to lift yourself up, lift somebody else up." That's a great one, right? Maybe the one that fits with this story so well is he has a quote, and he says this: "I will not allow any person to narrow or degrade my soul by causing me to hate them." Amazing stuff. This person lived a life of humility. And we can all learn a lot from that. And my question again is, how do you do that? I mean, how do you let go of pride? How do you let go of ego? How do you let go of self-focus? How do you let go of respect and honor that is due you? To just lower yourself and accept a lower position and walk in humility. It's an amazing thing. Number one, I think you have to be pretty secure in who you are and your identity. And I believe Mr. Washington was. And in such a way, not only was he secure in his own identity, he was secure in his identity in God as well. And he knew who he was in God's eyes. But he had to have an attitude that says, my worth and my value is not threatened by, and it is not determined by somebody else's opinion. If we can all live with that manner. You see, my worth and value is not threatened by or determined by somebody else's opinion. I guess I would say outside of God's. My value and my worth is not found in my position or in some image I present. You see, it's an attitude that says, I don't have to cling to my rights. I don't have to cling to my privileges. I don't have to cling to my position, my honor, my status. I can let all that stuff go so I can do what I need to do to be who I need to be. See, that's humility. Very easily, Professor Washington could have walked up to that woman and said, do you know who I am? Do you know the position I hold, the honor that I... But no, he was willing to let all that go and just do what he needed to do. And in the midst of it, and walking in that humility, man, he found one of his most generous people to donate to his institute and was a friend the rest of his life, to walk in humility. I also heard a story about a group of alumni, and they all had highly established careers, and they got together at one of their old professors' homes just to spend the day and meet together. And the conversation soon turned into, like it does oftentimes, complaints about the stress of work, the stress of life, the stress and the struggle of this upward mobility of trying to get where they can be in their lives. And so the professor offered all of them some coffee. And he went into the kitchen, and he returned with this large pot of coffee and just an assortment of mugs filled with coffee in them. And he said, go ahead and grab some coffee for yourself. Now, some of these coffee cups were cheap. They were plain looking. They were ordinary. But some of them were very expensive and ornate and exquisite. And he said, help yourselves to the coffee. And when every student had a cup of coffee in his hand, this is what the professor said. If you'll notice, all the nice-looking, expensive coffee cups have been taken up, leaving behind all the plain, ordinary ones. While it's normal to always want what's best for yourself, he says this is the source of your problems and your stress, folks. The cup itself adds no quality to the coffee. It's just a cup that holds the coffee. And yet every one of you went for the most expensive, went for that one that looked ornate and whatever it was. It's so amazing when I think of that. The cup adds nothing to the coffee. It just looks different on the outside. He said what you really wanted was coffee, but yet you went for those best cups. And then he went on to say, now consider this. He says, life is the coffee. And I thought that was a good quote. Life is coffee. That's pretty good because, some of us like coffee. Life is the coffee. He says the cups, that's all your positions, your possessions, your honor, your status, your self-focus, your self-promotion. That's all external stuff. It does not define you nor change who you are. See, as we started beginning this whole study of have the same attitude as Jesus, I started out with maybe the most important thing, and that's about finding our identity. Who are we? And I told you our identity has to be found in God, and it's in a most powerful sense in the matter of this, that we are created in the image of God, that we are loved unconditionally by God, and we have incredible sacred worth and value because of that in God. We understand that. But the second half, which was last week, we talked about the fact that we should do nothing out of selfishness, Paul tells us. Everybody remember that? Nothing out of selfishness. In fact, I heard some amazing stories this week of people who did nothing out of selfishness during the week. And they said, I consciously thought about this. And I said, man, I can't be selfish. I have to be unselfish and do these things. And they did all these amazing things to help people. And I said, that's exactly what we're called to do. Do nothing out of selfishness. So here we are. And Paul tells us to just have the same attitude as that of Jesus. And then he tells us that Jesus made himself nothing, talking about humility. Today we're going to see that Jesus revealed true humility. He made himself nothing. He took on the appearance of humanity. He humbled himself. He poured himself out, and I would say he poured himself out into a cheap, inexpensive, plain-looking cup because he knew the cup didn't matter. He was willing to let go of position and honor and status and rights and privileges of being God. It was not beneath him to let go of all these things to come down to us because he loves us and to get his hands dirty in the midst of all that's happening here because he wanted to let us know how much God truly loves us and wants to be with us. It reminds me when I was going through school, I had a good friend and he worked at a fast food restaurant chain. I won't tell you which one, but its mascot is a clown. Okay, you might figure it out. And he said, man, somebody from corporate was there that day. I mean, a big wig, man, major person, one of the top people that's there. He says he was there just kind of going through, checking out different different fast food chains. And so he's hanging out there, and he says, all of a sudden, like it happens, if anybody's ever worked fast food before, 2 or 3 in the afternoon when you think nothing's going on, there's hardly anybody there working, a bus pulls up, and 100 people get off. And all of a sudden, you got to feed 100 people, and you don't have the workers to do it. And he says it was the most amazing thing that this person with prestige and honor and its status, I mean, this is a person whose position he was top, man. He was the boss man. He said immediately took off his jacket, put on an apron, and he said for an hour he sat back there and cooked with me on the grill. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He let his position go. He didn't care about that, his status and all that. He said this needed to be done, and he reached out to people. You see, just like Booker T. Washington, just like Jesus, willing to let go of all that other garbage, to focus in on us. See, the very definition of humility means to be made low, or to go from high to low, or to be put to a lower point than one was before. So the idea of pride is when we lift ourselves up and try to put ourselves up, but humility is when we make ourselves lower or go to a lower position. See, Jesus reached down, and it says he made himself nothing, which means he went from a high position, God, to a lower position, walking with us on this earth with humanity. Because he wanted to show us how much God loves us. He wasn't afraid to dive in head first to the muck and the mire and the garbage, and everything's here because of the curse of sin that's with us and all the stuff that happens. He wasn't afraid to just get right in here, get his hands dirty, and literally pour out his life unto death to be here with us. He showed us what humility is all about. And it's the example for us in our lives. He showed us the way. You know, another aspect of humility is to have what they call a proper estimate of oneself in relation to God and in relation to other people, and that's an important one. See, Jesus came to this world and showed us the proper attitude and lifestyle. And what he showed us was this: a humble life where he was dependent upon God. He showed us a humble life, not only of a willing submission to God, and then he showed us how to relate properly to people around us and to let us know we're all on the same plane. No one's better than anybody else. We're all the same. And he wanted us to see it. It reminds me of a quote from Mother Teresa. She says, you know, if you're humble, nothing will touch you. Neither the praise to try and lift you up or the disgrace that's going to bring you down. It doesn't matter because you know what you are. You know who you are. You know whose you are. When you're humble, you don't worry about those things. So here's Jesus. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be selfishly clung to, but he let it go. See, Jesus knew his identity. Jesus is God. Like I said, God, that's a pretty good resume, isn't it? I mean, if you're God, that's pretty good. He knew he was God. And what the scripture says, and I'm not going to throw a bunch of Greek words out, even though, boy, I'd love to, but I'm not going to. A bunch of words, and this is what it really means. It means Jesus always was God, is God, and will be God. His very nature is this an eternal, unchanging form. He was God. He has the same characteristics, the same qualities, the same essence, the same essentialness as God, although it's not necessarily the same outer form. It might look a little different, but it's the same. I'm going to give you an example here. Everybody ready? Here we go. Look at that. I'm the smallest one there. Now, if you look at that little guy there, and then you look at me, you say, that could not be the same person. There's no way. You look different. But it doesn't matter. You do a DNA test, you know what you're going to find out? Same essence, same essentialness. That's the same person. That's the same. We are the same. We look different. That's okay. You don't have to look exactly the same to be the same. You see, this is, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wasn't he a cute kid? And then your next thought was, what in the world happened? And I know it did. You get older, you get a little wider, glasses, the hair gets grayer. In fact, I probably have about the same amount of hair, I guess, is what's up there. I don't know. It's just, that happens. It's okay. It's okay. But what Paul wants us to understand, it wasn't about outward appearance. Jesus could look like a person here, and God, the Father, could be in heaven there, but they're still the same essence. See, Jesus did not consider equality with God something that had to be grasped a hold of or selfishly held to for his own advantage. But he made himself nothing. Nothing. He emptied himself. He divested himself. Literally what it says, it's an active verb. He chose to divest himself of his rights, of his authority, of his position, his title, his power. He chose to be made lower. See, there's such a contrast here. Jesus is God, creator and sustainer of all things, the scripture tells us. Nothing came into existence that didn't come into existence through him. He is the one. All things were created by him, Paul tells us. All things were created for him, Paul tells us. See, that's where we find our purpose and all that we are in the fact that Jesus has created us for him. And it's just the most amazing thing. Yet he didn't selfishly cling to this position, but he made himself nothing, this complete self-surrender. Can you imagine? I mean, we know what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the incarnation. We're talking about God, the one who sat on the throne of heaven, is now a helpless infant in a feeding trough in the middle of nowhere. He was humble because he went from a high position to a low position. Jesus understood his worth and value aren't determined by clutching onto these things. So he gave up his status, his rights, his position, his privileges, his power, his advantages, his glory, his majesty, all the perks of being God. He gave them up to just have a plain, ordinary cup and walk for 33 years with us to show us how to live. He was made in human likeness. And I'm not going to go deep into this, but just know that in the original language, there's a word in there. And what it means is that Jesus didn't exchange his deity for humanity, and all of a sudden it was different. But what that word means is that he took something new upon himself. I mean, Jesus could not stop being God any more than we could become God. It doesn't work that way. That's his essence. That's all he is. He is deity. And yet it says he took on humanity, and he came and walked a mile in our shoes, which is so amazing to me. He voluntarily accepted to live under human limitations. You imagine the God of all who created everything. He's hungry now. He's thirsty. He gets tired. He lives just the way we do. He lives under our limitations. And somehow he's able to hide and cover up this glory that he had. There's a story, Luke 9:28, it's called the Transfiguration. Some of you might know, I've heard of this before, where Jesus takes one dark night up on a big hill, Peter, James, and John, and they're up there, and all of a sudden he says this cloud envelops us, and lo and behold, they look out, and Moses and Elijah are there. And they're like, whoa, what's going on? They don't even know what to do. And Jesus says, I'm going to reveal myself to you a little bit. And it says that he allowed his glory of being God to show. And Peter later proclaimed it when he was writing in his epistles. He was like, it was like this blinding light in the night, in the darkness, that God just said, Jesus said, well, here, let me show you what my glory is. I am truly God. And they were like, whoa. But he was able to hide that for most of the time. And I believe Jesus gave up his independent use of his attributes. He didn't just run around being God all the time, doing God things. He ran around doing human things and in conjunction with God, in a reliance upon God. Remember how often he prayed to the Father, okay, God, listen, how can we make this happen? You see, in that reliance upon God, that in conjunction with God, he was able to do amazing things and miracles. Yes, he did. But he lived in this thing called humanity because he wanted us to understand how to live. He showed us the way to live. In other words, as Paul writes for us, he humbled himself. Humbled himself. Actively, remember, he made himself nothing. He went from high to low, and he revealed the proper actions and attitudes for us. He showed us what we are to live with, a reliance upon God. He showed us that we are to live with a willing submission to God. He showed us how to live in conjunction with other people and relating properly to other people, and that we're all in the same playing field. If you'll notice, when Jesus was out doing the things that he did, talking about the things that he talked about, it was always about the way that he could take those who were considered lowly and lifting them up. And those who considered themselves kind of proud and thought they were pretty special. And he had a way to kind of lower them down. Not in a way that he just inverted it, so then the lowly people are now the proud ones up here and the other ones are down here. But he made a level playing field. He lifted some up, he took some down. He said, don't you understand? We're all the same here. Don't treat somebody improperly. Don't look at that person like they're below you. They are not. We're all the same. That's humility, understanding a proper relationship with those around me and a proper estimate. See, humility is like what C.S. Lewis said. It's not thinking less of yourself. Oh, I'm such a horrible, rotten, terrible person. Oh, now I'm a humble person. No, it's thinking of yourself less so that you can think of others more. That's humility. That's what Jesus lived. That's what Booker T. Washington showed us as he lived. Willing to take that low spot. You know, James 4:10, 1 Peter 5:6 say the same thing. Therefore, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time. Also, to cast your cares upon him, because how much he loves you and cares for you. See, Jesus showed us the way of humility. So I got a question for us today. Are you willing to take on humility in your life? Are you willing to take on humility? To make yourself nothing? To pour yourself out? To just quit focusing on self-promotion and my status and my image and my honor and all this stuff? Just say, I don't have to worry about that. I am secure in who I am in you, God, and I'm secure, so I can do whatever I need to do. I can be whoever I need to be. I have a nice little insert in your bulletins. Everybody see it? Humility is having a proper estimate of oneself in relation to God and to others. There's 3 aspects of humility here. And what I'd like you to do is just to take a moment, maybe 2-3 minutes, think about this, pray about this, and say, okay, God, a complete dependence upon you. Where do I need to make changes in my life to make this happen? A willing submission to God. Where do I need to make changes in my life to make this happen? Relating properly to others. What changes do I have to make in my life so that I can live the way you want me to and to walk in humility the way you've asked me to do so? What changes can we make? And I know it won't all happen here because there's no way you can think and pray through it all this time, but begin thinking about it because we got this final song we're going to sing for you as we finish out, and it's about just letting go of everything else so that we can have God in that relationship and do what we need to do.